I never planned to work beneath the hospital. No one really does. People imagine medicine as bright hallways, disinfectant, the faint squeak of polished floors. But there is a point in your life when money matters more than comfort, when you start saying yes to things you should have left untouched. That is how I ended up assigned to the night shift in the underground trauma ward, a place no one spoke about during training, a place that existed on paper but never in conversation. When Human Resources offered me the role, the director avoided meeting my eyes. She slid the contract across the desk with a tight smile that did not reach her cheeks. She said the position had high turnover. She said the hours were difficult. She also said the pay was nearly double the standard rate. At the time, that was enough. I signed without reading the smaller text. I only wanted a steady job and a chance to breathe without worrying about rent. I expected to find the ward somewhere on the lower floors, maybe near the surgical recovery rooms or close to radiology. But the directions they handed me were strange. To reach the ward, I had to take an elevator behind a maintenance door that did not appear on any map. The hallway was silent, almost soundproof. Even my footsteps felt muted. I remember standing in front of that unmarked elevator for the first time, badge in hand, hesitating in a way I could not explain. The doors were made of dull metal that reflected no light. A yellow inspection sticker peeled off the corner, showing 3 different signatures crossed out. When I tapped my badge, the doors opened with a sigh that sounded almost tired. I stepped inside and noticed that the panel had floors labeled in negative numbers, -1 through -6. A small keyhole sat beside the button for -7, as if that floor existed but no one wanted it reached. The directions told me to press -6. I remember staring at that button, wondering why a hospital would bury a trauma ward so deep that daylight could never touch it. The elevator began to descend with a slow shudder. It felt like dropping through layers of the world I was not meant to see. At first, I heard the familiar hum of machinery and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, but halfway down the sound changed. The air grew warmer then cooler. My ears popped. A thin chemical smell seeped from the vents, something like dust mixed with metal. I swallowed hard and tried to ignore the rising sense that the deeper I went, the less connected I felt to the surface. It was as if the elevator was lowering me into a different version of the hospital, one that should have stayed buried. By the time the doors opened, the air smelled recycled, as if it had been breathed too many times by too many lungs. The hallway outside was dim and painted in a muted color that looked gray in some lights and green in others. The tiles were old and uneven. Each step echoed in a way that suggested the space was far larger than it appeared. I felt watched, not by cameras or people, but by the ward itself, like the structure was assessing me, deciding whether I belonged. A nurse waited for me beside the reception desk. She was older, with a tired posture and eyes that held the kind of knowledge you only gain after years of working somewhere that changes you. Her name tag said Miriam. She did not greet me with the usual friendliness found in other departments. Instead, she nodded once and motioned for me to follow. The reception desk had no computer, only handwritten logs. Every page was dated and signed. The paper looked old, as if stored in a place with too much humidity. I noticed entire sections of the log were blacked out with permanent marker. Miriam led me through a narrow corridor lined with rooms. At first glance, it looked like a regular trauma ward. Patients lay in beds. Machines monitored their vitals. But the longer I looked, the more wrong everything felt. The beds were spaced farther apart than normal. Thick curtains hung between them, heavy enough that they barely moved when we walked by. The lighting was colder than the rest of the hospital. The machines were older and lacked digital displays, replaced with flickering analog meters that twitched in unpredictable rhythms. Most unsettling of all were the patients. They did not look like people recovering from accidents. They lay still in deep, unnatural sleep. Their breathing was slow but not peaceful. It faltered at random moments like something inside them was interfering. Their expressions were blank, yet their eyes shifted beneath their lids, moving too rapidly to resemble dreams. It reminded me of someone trapped behind their own face. I asked Miriam what kind of trauma cases these were. She gave the slightest pause, barely noticeable, then said they were long-term critical patients waiting for neurological stabilization. Her voice lacked conviction. It was the way someone speaks when reciting a line they have been ordered to repeat. I pressed further. I asked why the ward was underground and why the machines were older than the rest of the hospital. She stopped walking and turned to face me. The hallway lights flickered once, timed almost perfectly with her movement. She said the day staff does not understand what happens down here. She said the trauma ward operated differently during the night. She said it was easier for everyone if I learned to focus only on the tasks assigned to me and not the reasons behind them. Then she leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. She told me the one thing that has haunted me ever since. She said that rumors about the ward existed long before she began working here. Rumors about patients who shared dreams. Rumors about voices heard in rooms where no one was awake. Rumors about people who walked out of here without knowing their own names. She said the day shift never believes the night staff. They think we exaggerate. They think stress makes us paranoid. But the night staff knows something is wrong here. They know the ward feels different after sunset. They know the patients behave differently after midnight. And they know the elevator never sounds the same when it brings someone down for the first time. As she spoke, I watched one of the patients twitch beneath the blanket. His fingers curled inward, then relaxed. The monitor beside him spiked, responding to something I could not see. He did not wake, but his lips moved for a moment, forming a silent shape. A word I could not hear but felt. Miriam placed a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was steady, but her expression was not. She told me that once I start the shift, I must accept that the ward has its own rules. Rules that exist for reasons she said I would come to understand. Rules that protect us from things we are not trained to deal with. I wanted to ask more questions, but she shook her head. She handed me a laminated card folded in half. She told me not to open it until midnight. She said I would know why when the time came. That was my introduction to the underground trauma ward. That was the moment the surface world began to feel distant. And that was the first night I realized I had taken a job in a place where not everything sleeping was human. The longer I stayed in the underground ward, the more I realized that the patients were unlike any I had seen during my time in medicine. On the surface floors, coma patients breathe in predictable patterns. They have rhythms shaped by biology and injury. Down here, nothing followed the rules of a normal human body. During my second night, I took time to walk through the ward alone. I stopped beside each bed and listened. Not with my stethoscope, not with training, but with the uneasy instinct that something was off. The first thing I noticed was the breathing. It did not rise and fall evenly. It paused for long stretches, then resumed with a deep inhale that sounded like someone surfacing from a nightmare. Some patients took shallow, rapid breaths followed by minutes of stillness. Their lungs did not follow human timing. I tried to convince myself that trauma cases often presented abnormal patterns, but that excuse felt thin. The monitors beside them told a different story. Their heart rates would climb sharply for a few seconds, then drop into complete calm, then spike again without any external trigger. It reminded me of someone reacting to unseen events, as if their bodies were responding to something happening far away or deep within. I checked the machines for malfunctions. I recalibrated sensors and cleaned electrodes, but the numbers behaved the same. The spikes came in bursts, sometimes matching between patients. Their vitals synchronized and then broke apart, like a rhythm only they could hear. I leaned close to one of the monitors and felt my pulse accelerate every time the line shot upward, as if my own body sensed the change before the machine did. The strangest part was how peaceful they looked. Their faces were relaxed. Their eyelids did not flutter the way normal REM patterns appear. Instead, the eyes beneath stayed in constant motion, not drifting but darting rapidly, as if tracking something moving inside a dream. Their brows tightened at moments that coincided with the vital spikes, and a few of them clenched their jaws so subtly that I only noticed when I stared long enough. It was the kind of peace that did not comfort, a peace shaped by surrender rather than healing, a peace that suggested something else had taken over the responsibility of keeping them alive. Miriam watched me examine one of the patients and approached quietly. She always moved silently, as if the ward preferred it that way. She asked me what I saw. I told her the truth. Their breathing did not make sense. Their bodies seemed to respond to invisible stimuli. Their sleep looked too deep for any neurological scale I knew. She stood beside me and folded her arms. She said these patients do not sleep like normal people. They dream differently. They remain in a state the hospital does not have a name for. She said the day staff calls it prolonged coma, but the night shift knows better. I asked her what that meant. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the foot of the bed and watched the patient with an expression that carried more fear than professionalism. She told me the patients here sink into a level of unconsciousness that is not entirely their own. She said it is wrong to think of them as resting. They are not resting. They are participating in something unseen. When I pressed her, she told me something that left a cold weight in my chest. She said the dreams of these patients behave like living things. She said the dreams respond to changes in the ward. She said they become more active at night and that the spikes on the monitors are not malfunctions or physical distress. They are the dreams pushing against the body that holds them. I stepped back and looked at the patient again. I watched the slow rise of his chest, the slight tremble in his fingers, the faint tension around his mouth. I felt a pressure in the air that made the room seem heavier. I whispered a question. I asked who or what they were dreaming about. Miriam exhaled. She said no one knows. Sometimes the patients whisper during the deepest hours of the night. Sometimes they speak in languages no one recognizes. Sometimes they describe images that match across multiple beds, as if sharing the same landscape. The hospital records do not keep those details, and the day staff refuses to believe the night reports. But Miriam had heard enough over the years to accept that the patients were sharing something beyond normal comprehension. I walked to another bed, trying to steady my nerves. This patient was younger, maybe in her 20s. Her hair was tied back loosely. Her face had an expression that looked almost serene, but her breathing was too slow. I checked her monitor. Her heart rate climbed to an unnatural peak, held there, then dropped sharply. Her eyelids tremored in short bursts. I noticed something else. Every time her heart rate spiked, the patient in the next bed responded with a twitch of his fingers. His vitals shifted in mirror patterns. It was subtle but consistent. I tried testing it by adjusting one of the machines, but the rhythms followed no physical logic. It was like the two bodies were reacting to the same invisible source. I recorded the behavior in the logbook. When Miriam read it later, she nodded without surprise. She said the patients often sync with each other. She said their dreams prefer links rather than isolation. That phrase stuck with me, prefer links, as if the dreams themselves had intentions. During my rounds, I reached the far end of the ward, where an older man lay still under heavy restraints. His chart showed no violent behavior, yet thick straps held his wrists, ankles, and chest. His vitals were the most chaotic. The line on the monitor jumped like a creature trapped inside glass. I leaned close to inspect the leads and felt warmth coming from his skin, a strange heat, not fever, something more like an engine that had been running too long. I placed my hand near his mouth and felt a faint vibration in his breath, a low hum. I checked his throat and realized he was whispering without sound, silent words shaped by a sleeping tongue. The whispering continued for a full minute. Then his heart rate spiked and the lights above us flickered. The sudden change made me step back. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. Miriam appeared again, almost as if she knew exactly when I would need her. She touched the patient's shoulder with gloved hands and adjusted his restraints. She did not look at me directly. She told me that the ones who whisper are the ones closest to waking. I asked her if waking was a good sign. That was the first time I saw true fear cross her features. She said waking is never good down here. She said the patients do not wake the way normal people wake. Their consciousness returns in fragments. Their eyes open before their awareness. Their bodies move before their minds. When they wake out of order, the entire ward responds. She said nights become dangerous when that happens. I looked across the room at the rows of sleeping bodies. Their breathing rose and fell with no pattern. Their vitals danced like signals from some distant world. Their expressions were too peaceful to trust. I realized then that I was surrounded by people who were not simply unconscious, but caught in something that used them as vessels. Something alive beneath the surface of sleep. And for the first time since arriving, I wondered if the ward wanted them to wake at all, or if it preferred them trapped in dreams that breathed through their lungs. I did not receive the rules during training. I did not receive them during onboarding. I did not even receive them when the elevator first opened onto the underground ward. The rules were handed to me quietly, almost reluctantly, by Miriam on my first true night shift, as if the paper itself carried weight she did not want to hold any longer. It was close to midnight when she approached me at the reception desk. The lights above us buzzed faintly. The ward was silent except for the soft rise and fall of mechanical breathing from the comatose patients. She placed a folded card on the counter without speaking. The way she avoided looking at it made me hesitate before picking it up. She told me to read it in the medication room, not out here. Some of the patients listened when they should not. That was the first detail that unsettled me. Patients in deep coma were not supposed to hear anything, yet she acted like the walls themselves had ears connected to sleeping minds. I stepped into the medication room, closed the door, and turned on the small lamp near the sink. The overhead lights were too harsh, and something about the card made me want a softer glow. My hands felt colder than they should as I unfolded the laminated sheet. There were 8 rules printed in small, cramped letters. I read the first one twice. Rule 1: begin your rounds with bed 6 every night. No exceptions. The number caught my eye. Bed 6 was the older man restrained under thick straps, the one who whispered without sound. I thought they wanted me to start with the most critical patient, but something about the phrasing felt intentional. It did not say his condition required attention. It said I had no choice. I moved to the next rule. Rule 2: after midnight, do not touch any patient in bed 3. If adjustments are needed, call the senior nurse. Bed 3 was a young woman with calm features and a strange rhythm in her breathing. She did not seem dangerous. She did not twitch like the others, yet the rules singled her out. I wondered why midnight mattered. I wondered what changed after that hour. I wondered why only the senior nurse was allowed near her. The third rule made my stomach tighten. Rule 3: if you hear your name whispered from any direction, do not reply. Do not search for the source. Continue working as if nothing happened. I remembered the faint voice I heard on my first night, the strained, underwater tone that had echoed through the corridor. I had convinced myself it was a malfunctioning speaker or a dreamlike moment brought on by exhaustion. But now I saw its name printed on an official document, as if the hospital understood something supernatural but refused to acknowledge it openly. I moved to Rule 4, hopping for something normal, something logical. Rule 4: never stand between beds 4 and 5 during the hours of 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. That space becomes unstable. Unstable. The word felt foreign in a medical ward. I tried to picture instability of a physical space, temperature fluctuations, pressure issues, structural weaknesses, but deep down I knew the rule referred to something else, something invisible that only manifested in that single hour. My pulse quickened as I read Rule 5. Rule 5: if any patient opens their eyes before the scheduled first wake, alert the senior nurse immediately but do not approach. It confirmed what Miriam hinted at earlier. The patients did not wake like normal people. Their consciousness returned in a sequence, and that sequence mattered. I wondered what scheduled first wake meant. I wondered who determined the order. I wondered how many nights they had seen someone wake early. The sixth rule made the room feel colder. Rule 6. Do not allow visitors into the ward during night shift. Ignore all requests, even from staff who claim authorization. Visitors were rare for trauma patients. At night, they were forbidden entirely. But the rule did not warn against outsiders. It warned against staff who might not be real. That implication settled over me like dust in stagnant air. Rule 7 was the simplest, yet somehow the most ominous. Rule 7. Keep the ward door closed at all times. If you find it open, do not close it. Notify the senior nurse. Why would a door open on its own? Why was closing it a problem? The medication room suddenly felt too small, as if the walls leaned inward. Then I reached the final rule, the one printed in bold. Rule 8. If any patient wakes without assistance, do not move, not even an inch. Remain completely still until they decide whether you are permitted to move again. I set the paper down and stared at that line for a long time. It did not read like a medical instruction. It read like a warning from someone who had survived something no one should experience. The phrasing was precise. Not until help arrives. Not until sedation can be administered. Until they decide. Something about that idea hollowed me out. The thought of a barely conscious patient rising from a coma, with enough awareness to choose whether I belonged in my own body, filled me with a fear that rooted deeply. When I walked back into the hallway, I felt the presence of the ward in a new way. The machines hummed softly, but their rhythm no longer felt mechanical. The air pressure felt uneven, as if the temperature shifted between breaths. The lights carried a faint dimness at the edges, almost like a shadow that never moved. Miriam was standing by the central desk with her arms crossed. She did not ask if I read the rules. She could see it in my expression. She told me the rules existed for reasons the hospital no longer documented. Too many night nurses had suffered consequences that could not be explained on paper. Some resigned after a single shift. Some left without collecting their final paycheck. A few simply stopped showing up. I asked her how long she had worked down here. She said 17 years. I asked how she managed to stay that long. She said she learned to follow the rules without trying to understand them. She said the ones who tried to find explanations never lasted. She took the card from my hand, folded it again, and placed it in her pocket. She said I would be given my own copy once I proved I could handle the next few nights. She said they withheld the permanent copies because the rules were not meant for people unwilling to stay. A strange feeling settled over me. I realized they were testing me, watching how I reacted, observing whether fear made me unreliable. The hospital needed someone who could remain steady in a place where logic failed the moment the clock passed midnight. I looked around at the sleeping patients. Their chests rose in unnatural rhythms. Their eyes fluttered beneath their lids. Their vitals spiked in erratic patterns that aligned with no medical explanation. I knew then that I should leave. I should have walked back to the elevator and gone home. I should have refused the job, the pay, the secrecy. But I stayed. I stayed because my bank account was nearly empty. I stayed because the surface hospital had already marked me for this position. I stayed because the ward did not feel like a place I could leave without consequence. And as the clock struck midnight, I felt the rules settle around me like a net. A net I had already stepped into. The ward always felt strange after midnight, but on my fourth night, something changed in the air. The temperature dipped sharply, enough that I could see a faint mist when I exhaled. The machines hummed in uneven patterns. Even the lights seemed hesitant, flickering softly as if unsure whether to fully illuminate the hallway. I was finishing my second round of checks when I heard it. A voice. Soft at first, like a thought brushing against my ear, then clearer, faint, muffled, almost aquatic, as if spoken from beneath deep water. It said my name. Not loudly, not urgently, just a slow, stretched version of it, drawn out in a way that made the syllables feel heavy. I froze beside bed 6. My hand hovered above the restraints, and for a moment I could not breathe. I waited for the sound to repeat, hopping it was my imagination, hopping it was a machine glitch, hopping it was anything normal. Then it came again. This time the voice lingered longer. It sounded as though the speaker was far down the corridor, speaking through something thick, like water or glass or a wall that did not fully separate worlds. My name echoed into the hallway, distorted and trembling. I turned slowly toward the source. The voice had come from the far end of the ward, where only a single supply closet and a sealed emergency door stood. The patients were all asleep. The staff was minimal. Miriam had stepped away to update logs in the side office. No visitor had entered. No footsteps had sounded. My skin tightened as I listened again. The corridor remained silent, yet the echo of my name still clung to the air like the residue of a damp breath. I forced myself to walk toward the sound, each step deliberate. My shoes tapped lightly against the tile floor. The machines behind me pulsed in uneven rhythms, almost encouraging me forward. I reached the corridor corner and peered around it into the dim stretch of hallway. Nothing. No shadow, no figure, no open door. Just the low hum of ventilation, struggling to circulate the stale underground air. I felt the urge to call out. My throat tightened with the instinct to ask who was there, but the rules echoed in the back of my mind. If you hear your name whispered from any direction, do not reply. I swallowed and kept still. The silence pressed deeper into my ears. Then, from the same direction, the whisper returned. Louder this time, more deliberate, spoken closer than before, as if something had moved while I was looking away. I took 2 steps back without thinking. My pulse quickened. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. The whisper stretched my name again, but this time the tone shifted. It carried a faint rasp, like someone trying to speak through choking water, a drawn-out attempt to imitate human speech. The sound made my stomach twist. I rushed to the nearest computer station and opened the security feed. I clicked through each camera covering the hallway. Each angle showed the same thing: empty space, motionless shadows, closed doors. The cameras flickered once, and for a fraction of a second, one of them displayed a static glitch shaped like a figure. It lasted barely a heartbeat before disappearing. I replayed it. The screen showed nothing unusual. My breath caught. My hands trembled as I kept scanning the monitors. Every hallway remained empty. Every door stayed shut. Yet the whisper had been clear. It had spoken directly to me. I tried telling myself it was an echo, a vent, a machine malfunction, anything else. But the voice had known my name. A soft knock sounded behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin before turning to see Miriam standing at the office doorway, watching me with a tired expression that bordered on pity. She asked if I had heard it yet. I nodded slowly, still glued to the monitors. She walked over and gently pushed the keyboard aside. She said the cameras never catch anything. They are not meant to, not at night. I asked her who was calling my name. She looked toward the corridor, her eyes unfocusing, as if remembering something she wished she had forgotten long ago. She told me the whisper happens on every night shift. She said it starts gentle, like mine had, and becomes more insistent if ignored. She said the voice never belongs to the patients. It never belongs to staff. It never belongs to anyone who should exist in the ward. I pressed her again. I asked who they were. She did not answer. She only shook her head. Instead, she told me the most important rule I had already read. Responding makes them stronger. They notice when you acknowledge them. They learn your voice. They follow your footsteps more closely. They become confident enough to try again and again and again. She said the whisper only stops when you pretend not to hear it, when you accept it as background noise, when you let it fade into the hum of the ward. But if I ever responded, even by accident, the whisper would become something else, something real enough to interact, something capable of standing in the camera blind spots, something capable of stepping through the ward doors without opening them. My chest tightened as she spoke. I asked how she knew all this. She stared at the floor and said she trained with someone who had once replied to the whisper. The woman answered only once. It was enough. She lasted one more shift before leaving the hospital entirely. She did not speak about what happened. She just stopped showing up. Miriam said the ward remembers those who respond. That sentence sat cold in my stomach. The whisper called again, but this time from the opposite end of the hallway, despite no sound of movement between the 2 points. It stretched my name lovingly, as if testing the shape of the word, as if waiting for me to break the rule. I forced myself to continue checking the charts. My hands shook as I marked vitals. The whisper came again, softer now, almost disappointed, almost coaxing. I ignored it. I focused on the machines instead, their heartbeats, their patterns, anything that kept my attention away from the presence moving somewhere I could not see. When I finished my rounds, Miriam placed a blanket over my shoulders, even though I had not realized I was trembling. She said the first whisper is always the hardest. After that, the ward simply watches to see how you behave. If you ignore it long enough, it becomes bored. It looks for someone easier. But if you slip even once, the ward becomes interested. I asked if it ever stops entirely. She said no, not unless the ward chooses someone else. The whisper did not return for the rest of the night, but the hallway never felt empty again. I could feel the weight of something lingering at the edges of the darkness, something patient, something learning. And as the clock struck 3 a.m., I realized that the rules were not just warnings. They were survival instructions. The whisper did not return the following night, but the air carried the memory of it. Every step I took felt heavier. Every sound in the ward made me think of something unseen breathing just out of sight. By my 5th night, the rules no longer felt like suggestions. They felt like a map of a world where normal logic had dissolved. I followed them carefully, especially the one about the scheduled first wake. No one had explained what determined the schedule. I only knew that the ward had its own order and that waking did not happen by chance. According to Miriam, the first patient who opened their eyes each night set the tone for the hours that followed. If the wrong one woke, the entire ward shifted. She never explained how. She only said it was dangerous. That night, something felt different the moment the elevator doors opened. The air was thicker than usual, warm and close, like a basement after a flood. The fluorescent lights flickered with a strange rhythm that made shadows crawl along the walls. The monitors along the corridor spiked in soft waves before dropping to almost nothing. I took it as a bad sign. I began my rounds with bed 6 as the rules demanded. He was still, breath shallow, eyes unmoving beneath their lids. His restraints creaked slightly as he exhaled, as if tightening on their own. I checked his vitals, normal for him, which meant unstable for anyone else. I moved on to bed 4, then bed 7, then the rest, checking each patient methodically. The ward felt louder than usual. Machines hissed and clicked sharply. The air vents rattled. The entire place felt restless. When I reached bed 3, I stopped. A chill ran along my spine even before I looked at her. Her eyes were open. Not wide, not alert, just open enough that I could see the dull reflection of the ceiling lights on her pupils. Her chest rose and fell in slow, terrifyingly controlled breaths. Her mouth was slightly parted, as if preparing to speak. But she was not the one scheduled to wake first. I stepped back, heart pounding. The rules screamed in my mind. Never touch bed 3 after midnight. Never approach a patient who wakes on their own. Alert the senior nurse immediately. I reached for the call button, but before I could press it, her eyes shifted. Her pupils dragged slowly across the room until they locked onto me. That movement was not natural. It was not the slow return of awareness or the sluggish drift of someone regaining consciousness. It was too deliberate, too precise. Her breathing changed. A thin sound escaped her throat, almost like a faint gasp or an attempt to form a word. That was when every monitor in the ward spiked at the exact same moment. Every machine, every bed, every patient. The synchronized jump of heart rates filled the room with sharp beeping. The air vibrated. The lights flickered violently, casting thin shadows that stretched in the wrong direction. I stumbled backward as bed 3's head twitched to the side, angling toward me. Her lips trembled. She took a slow inhale, deeper than any she had taken while asleep. It sounded like she was pulling air from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Then she mouthed something. I could not hear a sound, but I recognized the shape of the word. Help! My entire body locked. I wanted to run, but I could not leave her like that. She was awake. She was aware. She was pleading. But the rules repeated in my mind. Do not approach. Do not touch. Do not interact. My hand trembled as I reached for the call button again. Before I could press it, the door to the ward banged open. Miriam rushed in, her face pale, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. She saw bed 3, saw her open eyes, saw the synchronized monitors, and her expression collapsed. She whispered something under her breath, not a prayer, more like a confirmation of the worst possible outcome. She pushed past me and headed straight for the medication cart. Her hands shook as she drew up a syringe. She told me to step away and not make a sound. Her voice was tight, trembling at the edges. As she prepared the sedative, bed 3's body jerked once, then fell still. Her eyes remained open, unblinking. Her lips moved again, forming another silent word, but this time I could not decipher it. Miriam approached the bed with extreme caution. She placed the syringe against the IV line and injected the sedative quickly, then stepped back as if expecting a reaction. The patient's breathing steadied. Her eyes fluttered once, twice, then closed. The monitors dropped from their chaotic spikes back to their usual erratic patterns. The lights stopped flickering. The air eased. The ward released a tension I had not noticed fully until it vanished. Miriam pressed her hands to her face and exhaled shakily. She looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. She said this had just ruined the order. When I asked what she meant, she motioned for me to follow her into the office. The door clicked behind us. She leaned on the desk and stared at the floor, struggling to find the right words. She explained that each patient is meant to wake at a specific time. Not every night, but when the ward decides. Their waking is part of something larger, something that keeps the underground ward stable. She said the schedule is not random. It is like a chain reaction. One patient wakes, then the next, in a sequence that maintains balance. She said the one assigned to wake first tonight was bed 6, not bed 3. The order matters because their consciousnesses are linked in ways we do not understand. If the wrong patient wakes, it disrupts the equilibrium. It draws attention from whatever exists in the deeper levels of their dreams. I asked why bed 3 waking early was such a problem. She told me something I wish she had never said. She said bed 3 is a conduit. She said the dreams inside her are closest to the boundary. She said if she wakes at the wrong time, the ward hears her more clearly. I asked what that meant. She refused to explain. She only said it invites things. Things that are not supposed to be aware of us. The machines outside beeped sharply again, as if responding to her words. She went quiet. The silence grew thicker. I asked what bed 3 had mouthed, whether she saw it, whether she understood it. Miriam shook her head without looking up. She said bed 3 never asks for help. Not that kind. Not in any language we understand. She said whatever I saw, whatever I believed she said, was not the patient speaking. It was something speaking through her. The room felt smaller with every passing second. The idea that something could borrow the voice or movements of a sleeping person made my skin crawl. Then Miriam placed a hand on my arm. Her grip was steady despite her trembling. She looked directly into my eyes. She said I needed to prepare myself because once a patient wakes out of order, the next nights always get worse. The dreams become louder. The whispers grow closer. The ward becomes more reactive. She said the place itself starts paying attention. I asked her why we still cared so much about the rules if they did not stop things from happening. She told me the rules do not prevent danger. They only prevent it from choosing us directly. That answer chilled me more than the whisper ever had. For the rest of the shift, I avoided bed 3. Even sedated, she seemed aware. Her eyelids twitched when I passed. Her fingers curled slightly, as if reaching for something inside her dreams. The machines near her pulsed in strange patterns. And each time I glanced at her closed eyes, I could not stop thinking about that silent word. Help, or whatever had worn her mouth like a mask to form the shape. I used to believe hospitals were consistent places, that if something happened during one shift, it could be verified during the next. Notes would match. Machines would record the same abnormalities. Staff could trace problems back to their source. That was how medicine was supposed to work. But nothing about the underground trauma ward followed the rules of medicine. When the day staff arrived after the night of bed 3 waking early, I expected panic. I expected questions. I expected someone from administration to come down, review the cameras, check the monitors, look at the vitals that had spiked across all patients. Instead, they walked in with the calmness of people entering a quiet waiting room. They chatted about their weekends while signing in. They joked about cafeteria food. They sipped coffee and adjusted paperwork. Their footsteps did not slow, not even when they passed bed 3's doorway, the same room where reality had bent the night before. I watched them closely. I waited for someone to notice that the monitors were still twitching with fragments of whatever had shaken them. I waited for someone to frown at the unusual readings. But every nurse and technician walked past the machines without even glancing at the numbers. One of them even hummed while checking bed 5, despite the fact that the patient's rhythm was still unstable. I approached a young nurse named Clara who had always been polite during shift exchanges. I told her what happened. I told her about the sudden awakening, the synchronized vitals, the lights flickering. I expected shock or at least concern. She laughed softly, the way someone laughs when they think you are exaggerating. She said the underground ward always feels spooky at night. She said machines glitch when the power grid dips. She said I was probably tired and misinterpreting the readings. I asked her to look at bed 3 herself. She did briefly. She glanced at the chart, noted nothing unusual, and shrugged. She said the patient's vitals were stable. She said sedation levels were normal. She said everything appeared routine. Routine. That word struck me hard. She did not see what I saw. She did not feel what I felt. The ward was hiding from them, presenting a sanitized version of itself during the day. The machines displayed different patterns. The air felt lighter. Even the patients looked calmer, almost truly asleep. I wondered if the ward changed its behavior depending on who was present. I wondered if it recognized the difference between people who believed in the rules and people who thought they were myths. Later that morning, when the lights brightened for shift change, I walked past the security monitors. The footage from the night before should have shown the corridor flickering, the shadows stretching, the moment the monitors spiked across every bed. Instead, the feed displayed smooth, uninterrupted recordings. No flicker, no jumps, no disturbances. Bed 3 never moved. The other patients never twitched. The monitors never registered anything out of the ordinary. It was a perfect night on camera. My hands went cold. I sped through the footage again, searching for the moment I had clearly seen with my own eyes, but the ward had erased it, or replaced it, or never allowed it to be recorded at all. When I asked the day technician about possible malfunctions, he frowned as if annoyed. He said the cameras were upgraded 6 months ago and had not failed once. He said the underground ward had the most stable system in the building. I did not argue. There was no point. After the day staff settled in, Miriam approached me. She looked exhausted as always, but her expression softened when she took me aside. She asked what I saw on the footage. When I told her the cameras showed nothing, she nodded as if she expected it. She explained that the ward behaves differently depending on the hour. She said the daytime staff would never see what we saw, not because they ignored it, but because the ward did not show it to them. She said the night shift lived in a different version of reality. I asked why the ward hid the truth. She answered with a tired voice. Because the ward only reveals itself to those it wants to notice it. That idea terrified me. It meant the whisper, the awakening, the synchronized vitals, the flickering lights had not been malfunctions or hallucinations. They had been intentional, directed, selective. I asked why the ward would want me to notice anything. I was new. I did not belong here. I wanted to believe it had made a mistake. Miriam shook her head gently. She said the ward does not choose by accident. It chooses by need. It watches. It evaluates. It decides which staff members will understand the rules and which ones will never see them at all. She said the day staff does not have the ability to follow the rules. They would break them without thinking. They would respond to the whispers. They would panic during the awakenings. They would question the order. They would ruin the balance. So the ward shields them from the truth. I asked her what happens when the day staff eventually becomes night staff. She said most of them refuse the shift permanently. They feel wrongness here without knowing its source. They feel headaches, nausea, a sense of being watched. Most transfer departments long before they ever see the rule sheet. Those who stay long enough to read the rules rarely last more than a month. I stayed silent for a moment. The lights above us buzzed again. The air felt too warm for a basement. I told Miriam that the ward felt angry after bed 3 woke early. She did not correct me. She simply said the ward reacts to disruptions in the waking order. It adjusts. It tests. Sometimes it pushes against the boundaries of what we think of as reality. She said the next few nights would be unpredictable. I asked if unpredictable meant dangerous. Her silence was enough. During the afternoon before I left the ward, I watched the patients again. Their vitals were steady. Their breathing was gentle. Their faces looked truly peaceful, as if trapped in a calm sleep. But their eyelids still twitched. Their fingers curled occasionally. Their muscles shifted in slow patterns I did not trust. I realized the day staff probably thought these movements were normal coma responses. And maybe, if I had never worked nights, I would have believed that too. But I had seen what they did when the sun was gone. I had seen the ward's true nature, and I knew the patients were not sleeping peacefully. They were asleep because something wanted them that way. When I clocked out and stepped into the elevator, the doors closed with a heavy thump. For a moment, as the elevator rose, I felt something like pressure in my chest. A faint tug, as if the ward were reluctant to release me. I stared at the floor numbers rising, -5, -4, -3. The air grew lighter. The world felt normal again. But I knew the truth. The underground trauma ward did not freeze its secrets in daylight. It only hid them. It only slept the way its patients slept, waiting for the next night to breathe again. And when my shift came the next evening, I knew the ward would be awake before I arrived. By the 7th night, I had begun to understand that the ward changed depending on who was awake inside it. The patients breathed differently at night. The shadows behaved differently. Even the walls felt as if they listened. but I had not yet realized how alive the machines could become. It started around 2 a.m., the hour Miriam called the breathing hour. She said that was when the ward inhaled. I did not understand until I lived through it. I began my rounds as usual, clipboard in hand, heart heavy with the memory of the wrong awakening from 2 nights before. The monitors hummed softly beside each bed. The lights flickered in their usual restless pattern. Everything felt tense, like a held breath waiting to be released. Then the machines began to change. The first shift happened near bed 8, a woman in a deep, unnatural sleep whose vitals rarely fluctuated. I noticed her monitor had gone silent. Not quiet, silent. The usual beeps faded into nothing. The line on the screen flattened for a full second before pulsing again without warning. When it restarted, it no longer displayed numbers. Instead, the heart rate monitor showed symbols. Not letters, not medical codes, symbols. Shapes that shifted slowly across the screen like they were being drawn by an unseen hand. I blinked thinking it was a malfunction. I adjusted the leads, checked the wires, restarted the unit, but the symbols returned. One looked like a spiral, another resembled a ripple, the third flickered like a faint eye opening and closing. I stepped back, pulse racing. Then bed 2's machine hummed loudly, a low, vibrating drone. I approached carefully and saw that its numeric display had been replaced with a soft glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. Not the patient's heartbeat, something slower, thicker, more deliberate. I touched the side of the unit and it vibrated beneath my fingers, not mechanically. Nothing in the structure should have moved like that. It reminded me of a cat purring, calm and rhythmic, except there was nothing comforting about it. Across the ward, other machines followed. One by one, screens flickered into patterns, rhythms, pulses, not synchronized with each other, yet not random either. It was as if each machine had become a part of some larger organism, communicating in a secret language I was not meant to understand. I reached for the intercom to call Miriam, but before I touched the button, the lights overhead dimmed to a dull bluish tint. The air pressure shifted. My ears popped quietly. The temperature dropped enough that I could feel cold seeping into my fingertips. Then, as if triggered by the lights, all the machines shifted again. This time, they began humming together. Not in perfect unison, but in a rising and falling pattern, like a chorus warming up. The sound resonated deep in the metal frames of the beds and chills slid down my spine. I stepped back and scanned the room. In the dimness, the flickering lights from the machines cast strange shadows across the walls, long vertical shapes that stretched and recoiled like something breathing in the reflection. I whispered to myself that it was just an electrical malfunction. But the machines did not behave like anything electrical. They behaved like something dreaming. A quiet voice behind me made me flinch. Miriam had appeared in the doorway, her face pale in the shifting blue light. She told me not to look directly at the screens for too long. She said they were not showing data anymore, not during this hour. I asked her what they were showing. She walked toward bed 8 without answering. She placed her hand lightly on the edge of the monitor, careful not to touch the symbols themselves. She said the machines become windows during the breathing hour. Windows. I did not know whether she meant figurative or literal. I asked her what the symbols meant. She said no one knew. Long ago, someone tried to record them, but the symbols changed every time a camera captured them. They reacted to lenses. They reacted to observation. I asked her what the machines were windows to. She looked at the floor and said the machines were connected to whatever the patient's dream. She said something moves inside those dreams, something old, something searching, something that shifts the machines and their displays when it senses that the waking world is close. I stared at the monitors again. Now that she had said it, I saw something I had missed before. The symbols were not random. They moved with intention. They pulsed in rhythm with the faint twitching of the patient's eyes beneath their lids. I realized the machines were responding not to electrical signals, but to whatever lived inside the dreams of the people lying unconscious on the beds. Then one of the machines changed again. A monitor near bed 5 flickered violently. For a moment it showed static, then darkness, then something impossible. It showed a reflection. Not of the room, not of me. A reflection of a dark, open space with no walls and no lights, only a faint glow in the distance. The movement of the glow looked like it came from something alive, something enormous, something breathing. The image lasted no more than a second, but it burned into my mind. It felt like the machine had shown me something that should never have been seen. I asked Miriam if that had been a glitch. She said no. She said sometimes the patients dream places that are not theirs. Sometimes the ward shows us pieces of those places. I took a step back, feeling faint. I wanted to leave. I wanted to be anywhere other than standing among machines that stared back at me. Then bed 6's monitor jolted violently, making a sharp popping sound. The restrained man's vitals spiked. His eyelids fluttered. For a moment, I thought he would wake early again. But instead of opening his eyes, he whispered. A sound so faint it barely registered. A tremor in his throat. A breath that carried the weight of a voice from somewhere deep inside the dream he was trapped in. I leaned closer without thinking. The sound was wrong, too layered, too hollow, too distant. Miriam grabbed my arm sharply and pulled me back. Her grip was tight, grounding. She said never lean toward a whispering patient. She said the whisper does not come from them. It comes from whatever dream they host. And dreams in this ward do not forget who listens. As the machines hummed louder, I felt something strange in the air. A tension, a pull, as if the machines wanted me to look deeper into their displays, as if something inside them was trying to catch my attention, like a hand pressing against a window pane. I forced myself to look away. The machines continued humming for several minutes, then slowly returned to normal. Numbers reappeared, vitals stabilized, the lights brightened, the pressure eased. The breathing hour had ended. But long after the machines stilled, I still felt their hum beneath my skin. I knew they had shown me more than symbols. They had shown intention, awareness, a kind of hunger that did not belong to wires or screens. When the hour was over, Miriam walked me back to the desk. She said I handled it well. She said the machines did not focus on me too much. Not yet. I asked her how she could tell. She said the machines only focus on people they recognize. And the ward was beginning to recognize me. 2 nights after the dreaming machines revealed their windows, the ward grew quieter in a way that did not feel natural. Quiet is supposed to feel peaceful. This was the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums, the kind that hides movement behind silence. Even the machines hummed lower than usual, as if trying not to disturb something that had settled over us. It was close to 3 a.m. when I began to feel the shift. Bed 9's curtain swayed even though there was no airflow. Bed 2's monitor pulse slowed to a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Bed 6 strained against his restraints with the faintest pressure, almost like he was testing them. I tried to stay focused. The rules said nothing about nights like this. There were no instructions for what to do when the ward itself felt awake. I had just finished recording Bed 12's vitals when I heard it. A faint voice, a real voice, not the whisper from the corridor, not the underwater distortion, something clearer, weak but unmistakably human. I spun around. The sound came from Bed 4, a patient who had been completely unresponsive for almost a year. He was a middle-aged man with a long surgical scar across his temple. His breathing was usually steady, his vitals rarely changed, and he had never shown signs of waking. Yet now, in the dim blue light, I saw his lips move. I approached carefully, remembering the rules. The patient did not appear awake. His eyes were still closed. His breathing was slow, but his mouth shaped a word with deliberate care. Something. The sound barely escaped him, but it was enough to freeze me in place. I asked softly if he could hear me. It was an instinct, a mistake. The rules warned against interacting with semi-aware patients, especially at night. The moment I spoke, his entire body twitched. His eyelids fluttered in rapid patterns. His throat convulsed. His breathing caught and restarted with a sharp gasp. The machines around us reacted instantly. His monitor spiked. The machine beside bed 3 flickered. The temperature in the room dropped so sharply that every hair on my arms rose. I stepped back and reached for the call button. Before I pressed it, the patient spoke again. This time he said a full phrase. "Do not let it reach me." His voice sounded layered, like it came from multiple distances at once. Near, far, beneath something heavy. It made my spine lock. I stared at him in disbelief. There was no sign of consciousness in his face, yet the message carried clarity, intent, awareness of something beyond his body. I asked who he was talking about, but he did not respond. Instead, his breathing sped up. His hands curled into fists. His jaw clenched so tightly that I thought his teeth might crack. Then he said another phrase. "It is moving." I did not want to know what he meant. I did not want to imagine what could move in a place where patients lived inside dreams that responded to machines. But I forced myself to look around the room. Nothing seemed different. Then behind me, faint creaking sounded from the tiles. A pressure beneath the floor, a slow shift, like something crawling deep under the concrete. I took a step back from the patient, heart hammering. The patient opened his mouth wider, trembling. His eyelids fluttered again. His tongue moved as if trying to form more words, but only a faint rasp escaped. Suddenly, the temperature dropped again. The lights flickered. A deep vibration moved through the floor. The patient gasped sharply and whispered one last warning. "It is waking up." The machines beside him shrieked in sudden alarm. His vitals spiked to dangerous levels. I slammed the call button. Miriam appeared seconds later, breathless, eyes wide with a fear I had never seen in her before. She saw the patient's movements, the rising vitals, the trembling floor, and her expression darkened. She told me to step away immediately. I backed up until my shoulders pressed against the wall. She leaned over the patient and spoke to him softly, not in comfort, more like reciting a ritual she hoped would calm whatever was happening inside him. His body jerked once, then twice, then went still. The vitals dropped suddenly, but not to normal levels, more like they had been snatched back into the silent patterns of coma sleep. Miriam pressed her fingers gently to his neck, checking his pulse. She exhaled slowly when she found one. I asked what he had meant, what was waking up, what was moving beneath the floor. She did not answer. She only whispered the same phrase I had heard her speak once before. "Not tonight." She pulled the curtain around bed 4, shielding him from view. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied the fabric. When she finished, she turned to me. She asked exactly what he said. I repeated every word. Her face tightened with each phrase. When I finished, she closed her eyes briefly, as if something heavy inside her had confirmed itself. She told me that sometimes the patients dream in sync. Sometimes the dreams overlap. Sometimes something inside those dreams becomes restless and pushes its way closer to the surface. I asked if she meant the machines were showing images from the dreams again. She shook her head. She said this was different. She said some patients were closer to the boundary than others. Bed 4 had always been quiet, but the scar on his temple suggested something deeper had happened to him before arriving here. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. She said the dreams inside these patients do not always stay within them. Sometimes the dreams reach for the waking world. Sometimes they try to climb upward. And when a patient speaks while unconscious, it is rarely their voice. It is the dream speaking through them. I asked her what the dream wanted. She said no one knows, but every time it reaches through a patient, the ward reacts. The lights dim, the air shifts, the floor trembles. The dream pushes upward. The ward pushes back. I looked at the tiles beneath my feet. The faint vibration had stopped, but the memory of it lingered like the residue of a nightmare. I asked again what he meant by it waking up. Miriam took a long breath and finally answered. She said that somewhere in the subconscious link between these patients, something ancient lies dormant, something that responds to shifts in the waking order, something that grows stronger when rules are broken. And bed 3 waking early had disturbed the balance. Now the dreams were responding. When the shift finally ended, I walked toward the elevator in silence. The hallway felt narrow, the lights dimmer than usual. I sensed movement behind the walls, soft pulses in the floor. As the elevator doors closed, I thought of the patient's voice. "Do not let it reach me." I did not know what it was, but I knew it was closer now. Closer than before. By my 9th night, the ward no longer felt like a medical space. It felt like a living structure waiting for something to happen. Every hallway seemed slightly narrower. Every machine hummed with a faint, pulsing rhythm. Even the air tasted metallic, like a storm building underground. I entered the ward tents expecting another early awakening or another whisper. Instead, the night fell into a strange calm. Too calm. The patients lay still. Their vitals held steady in unnatural patterns. The lights above shimmered faintly, as if coated in a thin layer of moisture. The calm lasted until midnight. That was when the clock on the wall stopped. I did not see it freeze at first. I only felt a sudden change in the room, a shift that made my body tighten. The air pressure dropped. A low vibration moved through the walls, like the entire ward had inhaled and held its breath. Then I noticed the clock. The second hand had halted mid-tick, perfectly still. The minute hand froze between numbers. My phone screen displayed the same time, then refused to respond when I tapped it. The monitors glowed with steady lines but no longer updated their readings. Everything had paused. Except me. My heart thudded hard against my ribs. I walked toward the clock slowly, not wanting to disturb whatever had settled over the room. The tiles beneath my feet felt heavier, as if forcing each step to land more quietly than the last. I squeezed my phone again. The display did not change. Notifications would not load. Even the backlight dimmed, flickering faintly like a candle losing strength. The ward had entered a state Miriam later called a hold period. At the time, I had no idea what it meant. As I stood beneath the frozen clock, a faint scraping sound echoed from the far end of the hallway. It sounded like something dragging across the floor, slow and deliberate. I turned my head sharply, but the hallway looked normal. Dim, silent, empty. Then I realized something else. The patients were breathing in unison. All 12 of them. Every chest rose slowly at the exact same moment, held the breath, then released it in one smooth exhale, perfectly synchronized, like a choir of lungs bound to a single consciousness. A chill spread down my spine. I backed away from the clock, keeping my eyes on the hallway. The scraping sound came again, a little closer. Another breath cycle passed through the patients. They inhaled together, held together, exhaled together. My body wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted in place. Then the lights dimmed. Not flickered, dimmed, as if someone lowered an invisible switch. The entire ward took on a blue-gray hue, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the floor. The scraping grew louder. I spun around, searching for movement. The hall remained still, but the sound was unmistakable. Something was dragging itself closer. Something that did not belong to any of the patients or staff. Something moving in forced, uneven increments. My breath quickened. The hold period tightened around me like a net. I felt watched, not by eyes but by the ward itself. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, slow, echoing on tile. I nearly shouted for Miriam, but the rules echoed in my mind. I could not make noise. I could not draw attention. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just before the hallway corner. I took a step back toward the nurse station. Then the hold period broke in a single instant. Every machine beeped at once. The lights snapped back to full brightness. The clock resumed ticking. My phone lit up with delayed notifications. Air rushed through the vents like a breath released after too long. The scraping stopped. The footsteps vanished. The synchronized breathing ended. Each patient returned to their usual erratic rhythms. The ward exhaled. So did I, collapsing into the nearest chair, my hands shaking uncontrollably. That was when Miriam appeared in the doorway of the supply room, her expression grim. She had felt it too. She walked toward me with slow, steady steps, as if trying not to disrupt the fragile balance that had just reformed. She asked what I experienced. I described the frozen time, the synchronized breathing, the scraping, the footsteps. She nodded slowly, not surprised, not confused. She told me that the hold period was a rare event. It meant the ward was deciding who would wake first that night. I asked why the ward needed to decide. I thought the order was already set. She said the order can shift when something disturbs the link among the patients. Bed 3 waking early had thrown the entire system into imbalance. The ward needed time to reassess. I asked her what the scraping was. She did not answer immediately. Her silence stretched out until it became its own kind of answer. Then she said this: "When the ward cannot decide who wakes first, something else tries to make the choice." I felt my stomach tighten. I asked her what that something was. She said she did not know. She had heard it for years but had never seen it. It only moved during hold periods. It dragged itself along the tiles as if searching for the patient who would wake first. I asked if it could choose wrong. She said it had tried before. Her voice trembled when she said it. I looked back at the patients. Their vitals pulsed normally. Their bodies lay still. Their dreams were quiet for now. But I could not stop imagining the unseen presence dragging itself behind the walls and floors, searching. I asked her whether the hold period was over for the night. She shook her head. She said it was only the first one. The ward might freeze time again. I tried to steady myself. I stepped into the hallway and listened. The tiles were silent. The air felt even heavier. The faint hum of the machines did nothing to comfort me. As the clock ticked to 3 a.m., I realized the ward was restless. It had paused time to think, to choose, and something else had tried to choose first. After the hold period, the ward felt charged, like static clinging to every surface. I walked my rounds with slow, cautious steps, listening for the scraping sound Miriam warned me about. The tiles were silent for now, but silence in this place never meant safety. It only meant the ward was waiting. The patients breathed in their uneven rhythms. Machines flickered softly, still recovering from whatever had seized them earlier. I checked vitals, rechecked them, then checked them again because the numbers felt untrustworthy. They pulsed in ways that looked normal on paper but carried a wrongness beneath the surface. The scheduled first wake had still not happened. That alone put the ward on edge. According to Miriam, at least one patient was meant to stir slightly each night. A twitch of fingers, a shift in breathing, something small enough to be ignored by the day staff, but noticeable enough to keep the sequence intact. Tonight, none had moved. For the first time since I began working in the underground trauma ward, I found myself hoping the one assigned to wake first would rise soon. Anything to break the tension pressing against the walls. I made my way toward bed 6, the patient who had been scheduled before bed 3 disrupted the order. I expected him to be still, as usual. But when I approached, I froze. His head was turned toward me. Not slightly, fully. His cheek pressed into the pillow with unnatural stiffness. His eyelids fluttered rapidly, showing flashes of the whites beneath. His breathing was shallow, uneven. I thought he was waking. Then I realized something was wrong. The rules said awakening began with small movements, a flutter, a muscle twitch, a slow return of breath. His movement had been violent, instantaneous, too deliberate. I stepped back. My pulse pounded in my ears. As I watched, his lips parted slightly, revealing cracked teeth. A low exhale escaped him, almost a sigh, but it carried no relief. It sounded like something being forced out rather than breathed. I turned to grab the call button. That was when the other monitors spiked. All of them. Every patient's vitals rose in a sudden coordinated burst, the machines shrieking their alarms in panicked harmony. The lights above flickered hard. The air pressure shifted. The floor vibrated with a low, groaning hum. My breath caught in my throat. Bed 6's eyes snapped open. Not slowly, not gradually. They snapped open like a reflex. His pupils were dilated so widely that no iris remained. Only black pools staring up at me with an intensity that did not belong to someone waking from a coma. A chill crawled through my spine. I stepped farther back, almost tripping over my own feet. His body jerked once, not a seizure, not a spasm. Something pulled him upward, bending his torso with unnatural precision. He had not moved like a man waking. He moved like a puppet being drawn by invisible strings. He turned his head further, until his neck cracked softly under the strain. His eyes locked on me. Then he smiled. It was small, slow, measured, a smile that did not belong to a man who had been unconscious for 11 months, a smile that looked like someone else learning how to use a human face. The alarms continued shrieking. I pressed the call button with shaking fingers. Before I could call Miriam, he mouthed something. Not a word I knew. Not even a human word. The shape of it felt wrong, angular, forced, a cluster of sounds that would not fit together in any language, and though he made no sound, I felt it vibrate inside me like a silent impact. The lights flickered again. Behind me, I heard a metallic groan like something shifting beneath the floor. The tiles trembled under my feet. The machines kept screaming. I turned to run toward the office to find Miriam. Then I stopped dead. Because bed 3, the woman who had woken out of order earlier, began twitching violently under her blanket. Her vitals shot skyward. Her mouth opened wide in a soundless scream. Her eyes rolled beneath her lids, trapped in whatever dream had swallowed her. 2 patients waking at once was impossible. The ward had fallen completely out of sequence. I ran toward the office, shouting for Miriam despite the rules. She burst out before I reached the door, eyes wide, hair unsteady from rushing. She took one look at bed 6 and paled. No, not him. Not again. She said it under her breath, but I heard every syllable. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me behind her as she marched toward the bed. She did not touch him. She did not move close enough for him to reach her. She whispered a phrase that sounded like a warning. "You are not first tonight." The patient's smile widened. His pupils constricted suddenly, shrinking from blackness into something unnatural, something reflective, something that caught the light in the room and bent it. Then his body slackened. The smile faded. His eyes rolled back as if something inside him had released its grip. He collapsed into the bed like a puppet whose strings were cut. The alarms dropped instantly, monitors stabilized, the lights steadied, the vibrations in the floor ceased. Silence filled the ward. A heavy, suffocating silence. I looked at Miriam, trembling. She was breathing hard, her eyes still fixed on bed 6. She whispered something to herself before finally turning to me. She told me to stay away from him for the rest of the night. She said he had been claimed once before, long before I started working here. She said something inside him remembers the boundary between sleep and waking, and sometimes tries to cross it. I asked her if he had woken out of order the last time. She nodded slowly. I asked what happened. She did not answer. Instead, she walked to bed 3. The woman lay motionless, her vitals now steady but her breathing shallow. Miriam checked her pulse, then closed the curtain gently. I followed her back to the desk. The ward felt tense again, but quieter, as if waiting, as if listening. She sat down, buried her face in her hands, and exhaled shakily. She said tonight was a warning, not the real threat. She said the ward reacts violently when the wrong patient wakes. But when more than one wakes in the same night, the boundary between the patients' dreams begins to break. I asked what that meant. She said it meant the dreams had started moving toward each other. I asked what happens when they touch. She looked at me with the first true fear I had seen in her eyes. She said the dreams merge. And when they merge, something ancient stirs inside them. Something that is not supposed to wake. I stared at the dim hallway, listening to the faint hum of the machines. In that moment, I knew bed 6 had not woken by mistake. Something had pulled him upward. Something that wanted me to see it happening. Something that wanted the wrong one to wake again. After the wrong awakening, after the synchronized alarms and the unnatural smile twisting a face that had slept for almost a year, I could not focus on anything except the question that had been building since the night I first entered the ward. What happened here before me? The hospital treated the underground trauma ward like a forgotten basement, but nothing about this place felt accidental. Something deeper lay beneath the rules, beneath the patients, beneath the floor itself. I waited until the alarms settled and the ward slipped into a heavy silence. Miriam sat at the desk, exhausted. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes unfocused, as if watching memories instead of monitors. I approached carefully. I told her I needed answers. For the first time since I met her, she did not deflect. She did not change the subject. Something about the night had broken her usual restraint. She motioned for me to sit. She asked if I had ever wondered why the ward was buried so deep beneath the hospital. I nodded. She tapped her fingers slowly on the desk, as if timing the rhythm to steady herself, then began speaking in a low, controlled voice. She said the underground trauma ward had not always been a trauma ward. It had been repurposed, renamed, and hidden behind medical terminology to keep its history buried. Before it was filled with patients in impossible comas, it was known as Sublevel Facility 3. I felt a chill spread through my chest. She said Facility 3 had been built decades ago as part of a research initiative investigating neurological anomalies. The hospital partnered with private organizations that wanted to study unexplainable forms of consciousness, brain activity that defied medical expectations. Patients who reported dreams that matched across individuals, people who shared hallucinations, people who spoke in languages they had never learned, people like the ones lying in these beds. The early researchers believed they were studying rare psychological phenomena, but then the cases became connected. Patients began describing the same dream landscapes, the same entities, the same deep, resonant sound beneath everything they saw. The same presence moving toward them. I swallowed hard, remembering the patient who whispered that something was waking beneath the floor. Miriam continued. She said the researchers did not understand what they had found until it was too late. At first, they believed the shared dreams were caused by environmental factors, some kind of atmospheric influence, electromagnetic distortion from the deep sublevel. They ran tests, disproved their own hypotheses, tried again. But the dreams deepened. Patients fell asleep and stopped responding to external stimuli. Their vitals stabilized in patterns that seemed orchestrated rather than random. Some patients woke claiming days had passed in their dreams, describing structures and landscapes that no human mind should recognize. Some woke screaming. Others never woke at all. I stared at Miriam, unable to speak. She said the final stage was the discovery the researchers tried hardest to bury. The dreams were not isolated. They were connected across patients. A shared consciousness was forming within the collective dreams, something the researchers initially thought was a side effect of their proximity. But then it began influencing the waking world. Machines malfunctioned around the sleeping patients. Clocks froze, time skipped, shadows moved independently of light. Patients whispered words in unison that no one understood. The air vibrated, the floors trembled. The deeper the patients fell into their shared state, the more the facility began to react. I looked down at the tiles beneath my feet, remembering the faint tremors I felt each night. Miriam said it reached its peak when one patient woke, while the others remained deep in the shared dream. He rose from bed and stood perfectly still, staring at the researchers as if he could see beyond them. Then he spoke in a voice that belonged to none of them. She did not repeat what he said. She only said the facility shut down that same night. The hospital sealed the sublevel, but they could not abandon the patients. Too many families demanded answers. Too many records existed. Too many unexplained results had drawn the attention of institutions that did not want to lose their investments. So the hospital created a new explanation. They reclassified the sublevel as a trauma ward. They hired night staff who could be trained to follow rules rather than question them. They instructed the day staff to ignore anything unusual. They hoped the shared consciousness would remain dormant if monitored properly. I asked her why they kept the patients alive. She said the patients were not the problem, they were the containment. As long as the patients remained asleep in their controlled sequence, the shared dream stayed locked inside them. If they woke in the wrong order, the boundary weakened. If too many woke together, the dream spread. She said that was why the ward created hold periods, why the machines turned into windows, why the floors vibrated. The shared consciousness was always searching for cracks. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed. I asked how long she had known this. She said she learned it on her third year working down here, when a former researcher visited in secret and confessed everything to her out of guilt. She had begged for the facility to be shut down entirely, but the hospital refused. I asked why she stayed. Her eyes hardened. She said because someone had to. Someone had to keep the rules alive. Someone had to protect the waking world from what sleeps beneath it. Someone had to keep the sequence intact. And she said something else. She said she had been waiting for someone like me. Someone the ward had chosen to notice. Someone the dream had taken interest in. Someone who could hear the whispers and still follow the rules. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell her the ward had not chosen me, but I could not forget the way the whisper said my name. The way the machines focused on me during the breathing hour. The way Bed 6 had stared into my eyes as if trying to recognize something. I asked her what this meant for me. She said it meant I was now part of the balance. If I stayed long enough, the ward would test me. The dream would test me. The rules would become harder to follow. The boundaries would thin. She stood and placed her hand on my shoulder. She said the dream does not reveal itself to just anyone. It chooses individuals who can perceive its edges. Individuals who stand too close to the veil between what is real and what waits beneath consciousness. She said the dream was watching me, learning me, sensing whether I might become the next vessel. Her hand trembled slightly as she spoke the final sentence. She said if the wrong patient wakes again, the dream may not return to its host. It may reach for me instead. I looked around the ward, suddenly aware of every breath, every twitch beneath the blankets, every hum from the machines. The patients were not simply sick. They were holding something inside them, something old, something that pretended to sleep. And it was growing restless. After hearing the history of the underground trauma ward, I entered the next night with a weight in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. Every step I took down the maintenance hallway felt heavier than the last. The air was colder. The elevator vibrated strangely as it descended, as if resisting the idea of bringing me down again. When the doors opened, the ward greeted me with an unfamiliar silence. Not a peaceful one, a hollow one, the kind of silence that arrives after something has already gone wrong. The lights flickered in slow, unsteady pulses. The tiles felt warm under my shoes, almost like something had brushed against them from below moments before my arrival. The machines hummed at a pitch I had never heard before, low and dissonant, like a choir singing out of tune. I made my first round quickly. Bed 6 looked still, his lips relaxed, but I could not forget the unnatural smile he gave me 2 nights before. Bed 3's curtain was closed tightly. Bed 4 lay motionless beneath his blanket. All the other patients breathed in soft, uneven rhythms. For a moment, I thought maybe the night would remain stable. Then I heard the first alarm. It came from Bed 1, a patient who rarely showed any change at all. His monitor jumped. The numbers flickered. His vitals spiked into dangerous ranges. The sound cut sharply through the ward, and just as I reached the bed, his arm twitched violently. That alone would have been unusual. But when I turned around, I saw every other monitor flicker in response. Every machine in the ward reacted to Bed 1's spike. Not in perfect sync, but in echo, a ripple passing through 12 bodies. I reached for the call button, but before I touched it, the alarms fell silent all at once. The machine stopped. Every light in the ward shut off. I stood in complete darkness. Only the faint emergency strips along the floor glowed dimly, casting long shadows up the walls. I could see nothing except the cobalt reflections bouncing off metal rails. Then in the dark, someone inhaled sharply. Not me. Not one patient. All of them. 12 inhalations at the exact same moment. The air felt heavier, thick enough to taste. Something inside the darkness shifted, not physically but in presence, like the entire ward leaned forward. The lights snapped back on, and every single patient was sitting upright. My heart slammed against my ribs. 12 bodies that had been unconscious seconds before now sat rigid in their beds, eyes closed, heads tilted slightly toward the ceiling as if listening to something above us. My mind refused to believe what I was seeing. Even Bed 3 sat upright behind her curtain. I could see the faint shape of her silhouette. Their breathing had become synchronized again, each inhale long and strained, each exhale slow and shaking. I whispered for Miriam, even though I knew the rules for bad speaking during these events. She rushed in from the back hallway, skidding to a stop when she saw them. Her face drained of color. No, not all at once. Her voice barely carried. She approached the nearest bed, but she did not touch the patient. She did not dare. A low vibration moved through the floor. The tiles trembled beneath our feet as if something enormous shifted below the ward. Something that did not move like a machine or a person. Something slower, heavier, alive. A shudder moved through the beds. The patient's arms twitched. Their fingers curled tightly. Their mouths opened as if preparing to speak. Miriam grabbed my wrist and pulled me backward. She said the line she never wanted to speak again. The order has collapsed. I stared at the patients, unable to move. I asked what that meant. She said the sequence had broken entirely. Not one wrong awakening. Not two, all of them. The shared dream had merged. The boundaries between their consciousnesses had thinned into one field. A single dream. A single presence. divided across 12 bodies. The machines flickered violently, each screen flashing symbols that twisted into shapes I did not recognize. Spirals, eyes, jagged lines, shifting patterns that pulsed like heartbeats. Then from the direction of bed 3, a sound emerged. A sob. Barely audible, but unmistakably human. She was crying behind the curtain. Her breathing stuttered, her body trembled, her head tilted downward instead of upward. She was awake. Truly awake. I could hear her whispering incoherent thoughts, but her voice was trapped beneath layers of something else, something pressing through her silence. A faint groan rose from bed 6. His head turned slightly. His eyelids fluttered but did not open. The groan deepened, becoming guttural. It did not sound like pain. It sounded like a distant echo of something trying to speak through him. Then a violent crack echoed across the ward. The tile beneath bed 4 split. A thin fracture line snaked outward from his bed frame, branching across the floor. Dust rose into the air. The vibration beneath us intensified, rattling the bed rails. Miriam grabbed my shoulder and whispered that we needed to stand still, not move, not speak, not get close to any bed. I listened. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but the rules were clear. Any movement during mass disturbances could be seen as an invitation, a signal, a target. The lights dimmed again, leaving us in a cold half-darkness. The patients began to sway. Their bodies rocked back and forth in unsettling rhythm. Their heads turned slowly from side to side. Their arms shifted, lifting slightly off the beds. Their hands twitched open and closed as if grasping something invisible. Then they began to speak. Not in unison, not in language. They murmured fragmented sounds, layered and distorted, parts of sentences, pieces of cries, words from dreams, voices from distances I could not imagine. It was not 12 voices. It was one voice fractured 12 ways. One presence searching for balance, searching for something to anchor itself. The fracture in the floor widened, spreading beneath bed 4 until the bed tilted slightly. The shadow under him grew darker, thicker, like something pressed upward against the tile. A deep pounding echoed beneath the floor. Slow, rhythmic. A heartbeat. Not human. Miriam grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. Her eyes filled with terror. She whispered that this had only happened once before, long ago. She said the researchers had not survived that night. I asked what triggered it. She said merging dreams. And when merged dreams reached the surface, the presence underneath them tried to emerge. A high-pitched alarm blasted from one of the machines, followed by another, then another. A cascade of shrieks filled the ward as the machines lost control. The lights flickered wildly. Then 2 patients screamed. A real human scream that tore itself from their throats against their will. Their eyes snapped open, pupils blown wide, terror filling every inch of their expression. I stepped backward, unable to breathe. The presence beneath the ward pounded against the floor again. The crack widened. Dust fell. A deep groaning pushed upward. Then everything stopped. Every voice silenced. Every machine froze. Every patient collapsed flat onto their beds, as if dropped from a great height. The lights steadied. The fracture in the tile stopped widening. The heartbeat beneath us receded. But the silence it left behind felt heavier than anything that had happened. Miriam exhaled slowly, shaking uncontrollably. She said the ward barely contained it. She said the merged dream had almost broken through. Then she looked at me with an expression I will never forget. She said the presence knew my name now. After the night the order collapsed, I went into my next shift already shaking. I told myself I should quit. I told myself I should walk into the administrator's office, hand back my badge, and never return to the underground ward again. But the moment I stepped into the hallway that led to the sublevel elevator, something inside me sank. I already knew the truth. The ward would not let me leave. The elevator doors closed behind me with a hollow thud that echoed deeper than usual. As the cabin descended, the air pressure shifted so sharply that I felt a dull ache behind my eyes. The deeper I went, the colder the metal walls became. By the time the doors slid open, I felt as if I had stepped into the lungs of something sleeping. The ward lights were low, unsteady. They flickered in a soft rhythm like a heartbeat slowed by exhaustion. The air was thick with the faint smell of antiseptic and something else beneath it, something metallic and warm, like blood that had soaked into concrete long ago. I walked to the central desk and froze. The tiles beneath the desk were cracked. The same fracture line that split under bed 4 had stretched into the hallway. Thin, jagged arms branched outward like the veins of a dried leaf. The crack had grown. It had crawled toward the entrance while no one was there to watch it. I crouched down and ran my fingers near the fracture. The tile felt warm, almost pulsing, as if the heartbeat beneath the ward had pressed against this spot recently. I jerked my hand back just as a faint vibration trembled through the floor. Not loud, not violent, but deliberate. Like a knock. My breath caught. I stood quickly and scanned the room, half expecting the patients to be sitting upright again. But they lay in their beds, still and silent, their chests rising in uneven rhythms. The machines hummed. The lights flickered. Everything looked normal. But nothing felt normal. I made my first round mechanically, my hands trembling as I checked each patient. Every heartbeat sounded faintly muted, as if the machines were listening to something else beneath the surface instead of the body before them. When I reached bed 4, I hesitated. The fracture in the floor beneath his bed had widened even further. The tile sagged slightly, bowed from some kind of pressure below. Dust gathered along the edges, undisturbed, as if the pressure had risen from beneath but nothing had moved on top. The patient lay perfectly still. His expression was neutral, peaceful even, but the peace felt false, manufactured like a mask. I leaned close and listened to his breathing. Slow, too slow. Then I felt the warm vibration again. This time directly under my feet. A soft tremor, a pulse, then another. Each one slower than any heartbeat I had ever heard, but far heavier. Each pulse felt like something massive brushing against the underside of the floor, something with weight, something alive. I whispered for Miriam, unable to hold the fear inside me. She entered from the hallway seconds later, her face drained of color the moment she saw the fracture. She asked when it reached the hallway. I told her I did not know. Maybe earlier that day, maybe slowly over several nights, maybe during the hold period when time froze. She crouched beside the crack and placed her palm lightly above it. She did not touch the tile itself. She just hovered her hand above the fracture line. Her voice was barely audible when she spoke. "It is too close now." Those words chilled me more than anything I had seen so far. I asked her what was beneath the floor. She hesitated. Then she said something I will never forget. Not a single thing. A collective thing. A presence formed from the merged dreams of the earliest patients. Something that grew stronger every time the waking order broke. Something that had been building for decades. Something that had been whispering inside the patients' minds long before the researchers understood the danger. She stood and backed away from the crack. I asked how large the presence was. She closed her eyes. Large enough to break through if the wrong one wakes again. That was when the first sound reached us. Deep below the floor, something scraped against concrete. Slow, heavy, long strokes like nails or bone dragged across stone. The crack widened by a hair's width right before our eyes. I staggered backward. The scraping stopped. A soft groan rose from beneath the bed frame, echoing upward through the fracture. The sound was distorted, layered, as if dozens of voices moaned together from inside one throat. Miriam grabbed my arm and pulled me away. She said we had to keep moving. The presence was sensitive to stillness. If we stood too long in one place, it would sense us lingering above it. We moved quickly through the ward, but every few steps I felt it again. A pulse beneath the tile. A soft upward press. A faint vibration. As if something enormous followed us beneath the floor, packing our steps, learning our patterns. When we returned to the central desk, I noticed something else. The clock on the wall had slowed. Not stopped, slowed. Each second-hand movement dragged, as if resisting time itself. I reached up and placed my hand on the wall beneath the clock. The vibration from the floor traveled through the wall. The thing beneath us was massive. It did not have a single heartbeat. It had many, merging, layered, misaligned, creating a rhythm that felt more like a crowd breathing than a living creature. I turned to Miriam and asked the question I did not want answered. "What does it want?" She stared at the cracked tile stretching toward the desk. "It wants to rise." I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. I asked why it had not risen already. She said because the patients keep it contained. Their dreaming bodies act like anchors, chains. As long as they remain asleep in the right order, the present stays submerged within the collective dream. But when the order breaks, the chains loosen. I asked what would happen if all 12 patients woke at once. Her hands trembled visibly. She said the floor would not hold. The thing beneath us pressed upward again. A louder crack split across the tile. Dust puffed upward in a thin cloud. The patients stirred in their beds. One gasped, another twitched, a third turned her head abruptly. The present tension tightened around us like a tightening noose. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, heavy with a strange pressure that pushed against my lungs. Miriam told me to step back. I did. The floor beneath bed 4 pulsed upward again. But this time the crack widened by a noticeable amount. The tile groaned under the strain. The bed rattled softly. The patient's body jerked once, his mouth opening in a silent gasp. Then the groaning echoed through the whole ward, deep and resonant. The presence beneath us was shifting. It was aligning itself with something. It was rising. I instinctively backed into the wall, heart hammering, but Miriam grabbed my shoulder fiercely. She whispered that we could not show fear. Fear gave the presence direction. Attention made it stronger. I forced myself to stand still, even as the vibration beneath my shoes grew stronger. Then something new happened. Every patient in the ward inhaled sharply at the same moment. Each chest expanded, held, frozen, their bodies suspended in a state between waking and dreaming. The machines flickered into spirals and shifting lines. The lights dimmed to a cold blue that washed over everything. The tile beneath bed 4 bowed upward. A bulge forming, a shape pressing into the underside of the floor. Something large, something shifting, something alive. The patient above it gasped again, this time louder, his throat convulsing. His eyes rolled beneath his lids. His fingers curled sharply as if gripping something invisible. The bulge pushed harder. The crack widened. I stumbled backward despite myself. Miriam hissed for me to stay still, but fear overpowered every rule in my mind. And at that exact moment, the bulge stopped. It flattened slightly. The pressure eased. The groaning quieted. The presence receded like a deep inhale being withdrawn. The patients exhaled together. The moment passed, but not because we were safe. Miriam turned toward me with terror in her eyes. She whispered that the presence had pulled back, because it sensed something. Something specific. She stared at me without blinking. It sensed me. The moment Miriam said it sensed me, something inside my chest tightened so sharply I thought I might faint. I backed away from the cracked tiles as if distance alone could protect me. But distance meant nothing in this ward. The presence beneath the floor did not move through space the way we understood it. It moved through awareness, through attention, through the thinnest fractures of consciousness. And now it knew mine. The patients lay still again, their bodies slack against the beds, as if the synchronized inhalation had drained them. The machines showed low, steady vitals, a calm that felt fake, a calm like the moment a body lies limp after a violent seizure. I forced myself to breathe quietly. Miriam placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. Her voice was barely audible when she spoke. It has chosen a direction. I shook my head. I asked what that meant. She closed her eyes for a moment before answering. The presence does not rise randomly. When it senses a vulnerable mind, it tries to anchor itself. My pulse hammered beneath my skin. I asked if that meant it would take me, consume me, pull me into the merged dream. She said no. Not yet. But it had begun watching me. I felt the floor pulse again beneath my shoe, not violently, not insistently, just a faint tap, like a finger knocking lightly on glass. I stepped back instinctively. Miriam whispered sharply for me not to move too much. Movement could trigger attention, but standing still too long could also attract it. The balance was impossible, a trap of stillness and motion. A trap built by the rules. I asked her why the presence had not broken through tonight, why it had pulled back instead of rising. She hesitated. Then she told me the truth. Because it wants the first awakening to happen before it takes form. I asked why that mattered. She explained that the first patient to wake each night becomes the anchor for consciousness in the ward. That patient determines how the dream touches the waking world. The presence waits for a first awakening so it can use that moment to reach upward. The rules existed to control that moment. If the wrong one wakes, the dream shifts. The presence grows stronger, the boundaries thin. We had already broken the order several times. The presence was almost ready. That was when the overhead lights flickered violently, then dimmed into the familiar cold blue. The machines shifted into unnatural rhythms. The ward entered another state. Not a hold period. Something else. Something worse. The temperature dropped until my breath misted in front of my face. The air thickened like fog inside an enclosed space. A faint hum rose from the floor, vibrating through my calves. Then bed 6 moved. A slow, deliberate movement. His hand lifted. A twitch at first, then a curl of the fingers. I felt nausea twist in my gut. I remembered the unnatural smile he had given me. I remembered his mouth forming words that did not belong to any language. The idea of him waking now filled me with a dread that cut deeper than fear. I whispered his name from the chart. He stopped moving. His hand froze in mid-air. His fingers tensed as if something gripped them from within. Then slowly, he lowered his arm back onto the bed. He did not wake. He was being held in place by something else. A pressure spread through the ward, rising like a deep tide lifting from beneath the floor. The tiles trembled. The fracture widened another millimeter, enough to see a sliver of darkness beneath, a darkness that felt too thick to be empty air. Miriam whispered that the presence was choosing. Tonight it would decide who woke first. I asked what we were supposed to do. Her voice cracked when she answered. We wait. We do not speak. We do not move. We do not break the final rule. My heart dropped. The final rule, the one printed in bold, the one that had kept me awake through every night shift. If any patient wakes without assistance, do not move. Not even an inch. Remain completely still until they decide whether you are permitted to move again. I had hoped I would never need to follow that rule. Now I understood why it was written differently from the others. It was not written to protect the patients. It was written to protect me. A sharp crack echoed through the ward as a bed rail snapped. Bed 9 jerked violently, his body arching in a stiff arc, his chest rising as if his lungs filled too fast. His head tilted upward, jaw clenched. His eyes remained closed, but his entire body strained against the pull of something unseen. Then he collapsed flat. The presence beneath the floor pulsed, stirring the tile again. Bed 3 trembled behind her curtain. A low whimper escaped her throat. Bed 2 rolled onto his side, his breathing ragged. Bed 7's fingers lifted slowly into the air, as if pulled by puppet strings. It was happening across every bed. The presence was testing them. It was deciding which consciousness to reach through. The light flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. Then Bed 1 inhaled with a sound that did not belong to a human body. A wet, dragging sound, like a creature breathing through waterlogged lungs. His chest rose sharply, his arms lifted, his lips parted. I held my breath, ready for the final rule to take hold. Then Bed 1 exhaled sharply and fell still. It had not chosen him. The presence was searching. And then, finally, one patient moved with the slow inevitability of fate. Bed 12. A woman who had been completely motionless since the day I arrived. Her chart listed her as unresponsive. No voluntary muscle activity. No dreams recorded. No irregularities. She was the perfect vessel. Her fingers twitched. Her toes curled beneath the blanket. Her eyelids fluttered. Miriam whispered something that broke inside her throat. No, not her, anyone but her. I stared at the woman, frozen in place by the rule that controlled my every instinct. The lights dimmed further. The machines blared irregular alarms. The air grew unnaturally dense. Then her eyes opened. Slowly, her pupils shrank against the dim light. She inhaled sharply, her body stiffening as if something poured into her lungs. Her gaze lifted to the ceiling first, then turned toward us. And then her entire body snapped upright. Not pulled, not lifted. Snapped. A violent, precise movement, as if someone had taken control of her spine like a lever. Her eyes locked onto me. Not onto Miriam. Onto me. I stopped breathing. I obeyed the final rule. I did not move. Her mouth opened slowly, and a faint sound escaped. Not her voice. Not any voice I had ever heard. A layered sound, deep and cold and echoing from somewhere beyond the ward. She extended her hand toward me. A trembling gesture. A beckoning. Miriam whispered one sentence. The first one has woken. And she did not choose herself. My blood froze. The presence beneath the floor pulsed upward, pressing against the tiles. It was waiting. Waiting for her decision. Waiting for mine. Waiting to see if I would break the final rule. The moment Bed 12 sat upright and pointed toward me, the ward changed. The temperature plunged so suddenly that my breath turned to mist in front of my face. My muscles locked without my consent. My throat tightened. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but the final rule pinned me in place as surely as if someone had nailed my feet to the floor. Do not move. Not even an inch. Remain still until they decide whether you are permitted to move again. I had never understood the rule until now. Movement would not just attract attention. Movement would be considered acceptance. And whatever had risen within Bed 12 wanted acceptance. Her eyes were fully open now, wide and unblinking, but they were not her eyes anymore. They were too dark, too reflective, too focused. Her breathing stuttered in a rhythm that was not human, short inhalations, long pauses, a slow exhale that echoed faintly. Every other patient lay still, as if the entire ward had been plunged into a suffocating trance. The machines began trembling softly, their screens flashing symbols again. Spirals, eyes, lines that branched like fractures in ice. The presence beneath the floor pulsed louder. Slow, heavy, deep enough that I felt the vibrations in my teeth. Bed 12 raised her arm higher, reaching toward me. Her fingers curled in a beckoning motion. She was not choosing me. She was delivering a choice. The presence needed a vessel. Miriam hissed for me to stay still, her voice so tight it barely escaped her throat. She stood slightly behind me, but she looked like she would collapse if she had to witness another second of this. Then Bed 12's head tilted sharply, the movement unnatural, like the presence inside her was testing the limitations of the human body. Her neck cracked faintly. Her jaw shifted open wider. A sound seeped out. Not a word. Not a whisper. A vibration. A deep, resonant hum that crawled along the floor and climbed up my legs. A sound so low it felt more like being touched than being heard. It pressed against my ribs, expanding beneath my skin. The floor trembled. A ripple spread across the cracked tiles near Bed 4. Something beneath the ward was rising again. The hum intensified. The machines flickered wildly. One screen cracked. Another sparked. The lights above dimmed until only the faint blue floor strips remained glowing. Bed 12's arm lowered slowly. Her head turned toward the cracking tile. The presence beneath the floor responded with a pulse that shook the entire ward. Then she spoke. Her voice did not belong to her. It was layered, multi-toned, soft and thunderous at the same time, a voice speaking from inside a cavern, a voice echoing across water, a voice older than anything human. It said a single word. Move. A word that shattered the silence. A word that broke the rule. A word that was not a command from a patient, but from the presence beneath them all. I felt the rule tighten around me like a rope around my throat. Not moving had protected me until now, but the presence wanted the opposite. It wanted to see what choice I would make. If I moved, I acknowledged it. If I stayed still, I defied something that did not tolerate defiance. I could not breathe. The floor cracked again. A long, jagged fracture split outward, racing toward my shoes. The tiles rose slightly as something immense pressed upward. Miriam grabbed my forearm. Her nails dug into my skin. Do not obey it. Her voice broke as she whispered the words. If you obey, it chooses you. The fracture grew. The bulge beneath the tile pushed higher. Bed 12 trembled violently, her body shaking as if the presence inside her could barely fit within human bones. Her shoulders jerked, her back arched, her jaw unhinged wider than it should. Move. The word hit me like a blow. The air thickened. The floor jumped. The machine screamed in static. I felt my knees buckle, my vision blurred. The hum beneath the ward grew deafening. The presence was forcing me toward a decision. Move. 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 The word pounded through my skull, like a heartbeat that was not my own. I felt myself leaning forward, my instincts tearing at the rule, begging me to break it just to stop the pressure crushing my ribs. Miriam squeezed my arm until her hand shook violently. Hold still. Her voice cracked into a sob. Hold still or it takes you. The floor bulged upward again, nearly splitting open. Dust sprayed outward in a fine mist. The shape pressing from below pushed higher, forming a mound beneath the tile like the back of something rising to the surface. Bed 12 let out a sound that made my blood freeze, a scream without breath, a scream that belonged to someone drowning beneath the weight of something ancient. Her eyes rolled back. Her fingers snapped into rigid claws. "Move!" The presence roared the word through her body, bending her spine violently. I felt my muscles give way. I fell to my knees. My hand shot out to catch myself before I could think. My fingers grazed the floor. The cracked tile vibrated beneath my palm. The presence pulsed upward, with a surge that felt like a hand closing around mine from below. The rule shattered inside my mind like glass. Miriam screamed my name. The floor beneath me rose with such force that the tile bulged against my palm. Something warm pressed upward. The sensation was not moisture or heat. It was skin. Something beneath the ward was touching me through the narrow fracture. My vision swam. The machines howled. Bed 12 convulsed violently, her limbs jerking in every direction. The entire ward seemed to buckle. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The machines cut off. The lights snapped back on. The floor went still. The presence retracted instantly, like it had been pulled back by some unseen force. Bed 12 collapsed flat onto her mattress, limbs limp, eyes closed. The ward exhaled. The silence that followed felt like the air after a thunderstorm. Miriam fell to the floor beside me, gasping. She grabbed my shoulders and shook me until I focused on her face. She whispered that I had almost broken completely, that I had almost been chosen, that the presence had almost anchored itself through my movement. But something pulled it back. Something stronger. Something older than the ward itself. Something that had not spoken yet. Her voice trembled as she said the words. "The first one has not chosen you." Yet, I looked at bed 12. Her body was still. Her face was calm. But her hand twitched once. A faint, involuntary movement. A delayed echo of something that had not let go. The ward had not finished deciding. Not yet. And something beneath the floor was still waiting. After the presence reached through the cracked tile and nearly pulled me into its dreaming consciousness, the ward fell into a silence so complete that even the machines seemed afraid to break it. My palm throbbed, not from injury, but from memory. The feeling of something warm and living pressing through the thin fracture in the floor lingered like the aftertaste of a nightmare. I sat against the wall while Miriam steadied herself beside me. Her breath shook each time she inhaled. For the first time since I met her, she looked fragile, human, someone who had spent years trying to fight a tide that was older and stronger than anything she could ever understand. She told me not to stand yet. The ward had not released its attention. I nodded silently. My heart was beating too fast. My hands trembled. I kept replaying the moment when the final rule shattered inside my mind, when my palm grazed the floor, when something beneath the ward had touched me back. The presence had wanted me. I felt that truth sinking into my bones. The tile near bed 4 had begun to crack again, only slightly, but enough to show the pressure had not fully withdrawn. The bulge remained, low but undeniable, like the back of something resting just beneath the surface. Miriam rose shakily and moved to check the nearest patient. All 12 lay still, their bodies limp, their breathing shallow, but it was not the limpness of sleep. It was the limpness of something waiting, something paused, something listening. She whispered for me to follow her to the central desk. We moved slowly, carefully, as if walking across a thin sheet of ice that threatens to break with each step. When we reached the desk, she opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a folder sealed in deep red paper. I had never seen it before. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. She told me it was time to see the original rules. Not the printed ones. Not the ones laminated by administration. The first set of rules. The rules written by the researcher who had survived the earliest events. Inside the folder were yellowed pages filled with hand-written notes. Some lines were crossed out, some words were smeared, but the sentences that remained made the hair on my arms stand up. Do not assume the first one is the first. The ward chooses who wakes. The presence chooses who rises. The dream chooses who remains. Then the most chilling line of all. The true awakening belongs to the one who touches it first. My stomach dropped. I thought of my palm against the tile. I thought of the warmth beneath it. I thought of the almost formed grip. I whispered that I had not touched it long enough, that I pulled my hand away, that I broke contact. Miriam shook her head. The rule did not say how long contact needed to last. It only said whoever touches the presence first becomes marked by it. Chosen, watched, claimed. I staggered backward, my breath catching in my throat. Miriam stepped toward me, voice trembling. She reminded me that the presence stopped rising the moment my hand made contact. Not before, not after, exactly then. It had felt me. It had recognized me. It had paused for me. Something cold trickled through my spine. I asked her what the presence was waiting for now. She said it was waiting for the first one to wake. The true waking. The waking that decides the path of the night. The waking that binds a consciousness to the dream or to the presence beneath it. Before I could respond, the lights flickered hard. The machines on the far side of the ward beeped irregularly. One patient gasped sharply, a breath so sudden and forceful that it echoed across the entire room. Miriam grabbed my arm. It begins. Bed 12, the woman who had been used as a vessel only moments before, jerked violently. Her entire body arched backward. Her fingers clawed at the air. Her mouth opened wide in a silent scream. Then she collapsed flat again, limbs slack. Not her. Bed 3 trembled. Her hands twitched beneath the blanket. Her eyelids fluttered. A low moan seeped from her throat. Then her breathing steadied. Not her. Bed 6 shifted with a sickening crack from his neck as his head tilted sharply in my direction. The corners of his mouth twitched into the beginning of another unnatural smile. Then the expression faded. Not him. One by one, the patient stirred. Small movements, twitches, soft gasps, as if each body were testing itself, checking its readiness, waiting for instruction. The presence beneath the floor pulsed again. Once, twice, a third time stronger, rattling the cracked tile. Then the ward went still. A stillness that pressed against my ears. A stillness that waited. A stillness that knew. I held my breath. Then, at the farthest bed in the corner of the ward, a hand rose. Slowly, deliberately, a single trembling hand lifting upward from under a thin white blanket. I stared, unable to move, as the patient beneath the blanket began to sit up. Not violently, not abruptly, calmly, as if following a rehearsed motion. The blanket slid down, and the person sitting up was not a patient at all. It was me. My own face lifted from the mattress. My own hands gripped the edges of the bed. My own body rose, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. I staggered backward, choking on my own breath. Miriam screamed, but the sound barely reached me because the version of me in the bed opened its eyes. And they were not mine. They were deep, reflective, black as the pupils of bed 6 the night he smiled, eyes shaped like something had molded them from memory, not biology. A perfect copy, a dream-born duplicate, a vessel shaped from the moments it touched me. It stood up slowly, motion fluid, posture flawless, expression unreadable. My double turned its head toward the cracked tile. The presence beneath the floor pulsed in response. Then my double looked directly at me. My legs shook violently, my breath hitched, the room swayed. It spoke in my voice. "You woke first." The sentence hit me like a physical blow. I shook my head, stumbling backward. Miriam pulled me away, pushing me behind her as if she could shield me from something that wore my face. But it kept speaking, calm, soft, echoing with something beneath the words. "You touched me. You heard me. You let me rise." I shouted that I had not chosen it. It tilted its head. "No, I chose you." Behind my double, the patients began to stir again. Their heads lifted, their limbs shifted, their eyes opened one by one, black and empty and reflective. The presence beneath the floor pulsed a final time. Slow, heavy, final. Miriam grabbed my face, forcing me to look at her. She whispered the truth I was too terrified to face. "You were the first one to wake tonight. Not them, you." My double smiled, and in the reflection of its eyes, I saw the ward collapse into a single moment. The whispers, the cracked tiles, the machines, the dreaming, the presence, the rule, the hand beneath the floor, the pulse that recognized me. Everything pointed to this moment. I was the first one who woke. Not the patients, not the dream, not the presence. Me. And because I woke first, I had been chosen long before I understood the rules. The ward was never deciding between the patients. It was deciding between versions of me. My double took a step forward. The machine screamed. The lights exploded into darkness. The floor cracked beneath both of us at once. The presence surged upward. And as the ward split open beneath my feet, I understood the final truth. The underground trauma ward had never been about containing them. It had been waiting for me.